Hello, everyone. My name is Avi Lip. I'm a tech consultant with Goliath. Thank you all so much for joining us today. For today's webinar session, we'll be discussing how to prove that user behavior is the cause of Citrix performance issues. Kip Sims, are you on the line with me as well?
Sure am, Avi. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kip. Really do appreciate it. As a quick round of introductions, my name again is Avi Lip. I'm a tech consultant with Goliath. Then we have Kip Sims, who is part of our product management team. And today we will be discussing how to prove user behavior is the cause of Citrix performance issues. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate you attending, and let's get into it. Before getting really started on this, a couple things for the agenda for today. What we'll be discussing, as I just mentioned, is how to prove user behavior is the cause of Citrix performance issues. We're going to give a little bit of background on Goliath, talk about some of the challenges that we help IT professionals solve and assist with that, and then dive into a use case of how clients have been able to, again, prove that user behavior, which is sometimes a blind spot in the troubleshooting process, was the cause of Citrix performance issues within the console. We do have the chat functionality open, so any questions that anybody has over the course of today's session, by all means, feel free to put that right into the chat. We'll make sure to touch on them today, and if we don't have the opportunity to, we'll certainly follow up afterwards. But again, right in the chat box, any questions that anybody has during the presentation, feel free to insert those questions there. And one question that we do always get is, will there be a recording available? And the answer is yes. Within 48 hours of today's session, the marketing team will be sending out a recording of today's session for anyone who's on today or to anybody who registered. So without further ado, let's get started. And what I'll do is I'll pass this over to Kip to get us started.
Thanks, Avi. And I'll just let you know when to advance the slides. Thanks, everyone, for joining. This is Kip Sims. This is really one of my favorite topics because it causes so much pain for our IT pros that we support. And it's one of the scenarios where we seem to be able to provide so much value. We're really passionate at Goliath about helping IT teams. I mean, the job that you all do is really overwhelmingly challenging when you sit back and think about it. So, upper management decides on a new project, whether it's work from home now, BYOB, move to the cloud, zero footprint. I mean, you name the project. The fact of the matter is that the success or failure of that particular initiative rests on the backs of the IT team. And so when you take a look at all of those different projects and the sort of the baseline projects too, right? Upgrades, rolling out a new version of Citrix, deploying more Citrix, bringing on another group of individuals to utilize Citrix or acquiring a company, add into any of those projects the very loud executive or VIP who is complaining and causing people to lose their confidence in IT and IT's capability. And we've had this scenario happen so many times over the years, and especially since the pandemic started, where projects were ongoing, where people were complaining, stopping projects, installing projects because there are executives that are complaining. And what we're going to talk about today is how to make sure that reality is a past reality. So when our IT pros encounter that scenario, oftentimes there is a gut feeling, if you will, that causality lies outside of the data center. It's on the side of the end user or the client. And so we've talked as we've gone into these troubleshooting scenarios with our clients and said, well, what are the challenges that you're facing, right? And so the real challenge is proving causality for the most part. And when we talk to them about the challenges, and the reason I go through this, it gives you a bit of a backdrop for how we built out this functionality. Some of it's very recent as well. And they tell us that the reason it's difficult is because there's a lack of visibility into the root cause of performance issues. And that requires then manual troubleshooting checklists, which are both labor intensive, very incomplete, and take a lot of time. And so meanwhile, the end user is still complaining, right? Or you're at a user satisfaction group and they're burning everybody's ear off, So the tools that are out there, they tell us, are not designed for the purpose of troubleshooting user issues. So they have to cobble together multiple tools. Most importantly is they many times, because they don't have the right tools and the right data, they end up having to take user feedback as the guide. which is often, incomplete, inaccurate, and it's not timely. So there becomes this sort of subjective barrier to moving the project forward. And that gets to the final point that they seem to always make, is that because of the top 2 points, there's just no objective data to prove root cause or to put any sort of quantifiable number around how many user experience issues are there really. Is there, the entire company is suffering from latency issues, or it's just 1 or 2 people that have complained to the right person? So those are sort of the challenges that they talk about when it comes to proving causality. And so what we did was take a technology like ours, we added embedded intelligence into the technology and focused it on troubleshooting very specific issues like this one. And so moving in this image clockwise, we will automatically collect all of the data in the environment that could potentially cause end user performance issues. Maybe not all of it, but quite a bit of it, and automatically do that. We then correlate that data. We have the intelligence built into the product to correlate that data, and then help you interpret the data to reduce the time to troubleshooting and prove where the root cause of the issue is, which is incredibly important, because if you don't do that, it can't be solved. So if you move to the next slide, Avi, we'll move into an actual use case. And this is a customer of ours who's now a client of ours for a number of years that was running into problems around the pandemic. If you go to the next slide, I'll give a bit of an overview of the company. So it's a Fortune 1000 multinational company. On the left-hand side, you'll see they have 40 locations. They have 12,000 users, and they're using Citrix XenApp and XenDesktop VDI to deliver about 200 different business applications. Certainly there are the core ones, but different business applications and some graphics-intensive engineering applications. They have several offices internationally. So the challenge here was that they were suffering from inconsistent performance. There was a lot of the standard finger pointing when that happens. If you don't have the right tools in place to show the root cause of the issue, what happens many times, as you know, is that, the storage folks will tell you that everything is fine. Plenty of resources on the server farm coming from the VMware folks. The network folks will tell you that there's plenty of bandwidth to those remote locations. And so that doesn't help a whole lot. So you're left with a lot of finger pointing. And again, most of our Citrix teams have sort of a good gut instinct about where the problem is based on some of the things they can see, but they don't have the complete picture. And so what they did, if you go to the next slide, Avi, is they decided to deploy our product. Now, this is a current customer of ours. They ended up purchasing our technology, but it should be noted that we went in as a consulting services engagement to help them solve this problem, which we were able to do. So we gave them our technology. I won't read through all these bullet points, but the net of it is it took us about 2 hours to deploy our technology, to begin to pull back metrics and populate dashboards and session displays that would give them the ability to troubleshoot issues and start to build sort of a map of their environment so they can understand where the problems are occurring and start to really make some very quick moves on making adjustments to remediate those. And if you go to the next slide, I just picked out 4. Now, there were a lot of issues we found in this environment, and some of them were not enough network bandwidth, overutilized servers, etc. But these are the ones that really pertain to the end user behavior. So, and Avi, what he will do is go through these 4 specific ones. And these were most annoying. So this particular one, the first one, was actually a VP. And, they had been troubleshooting his problems for a long time, consistently complaining. And it turns out he had a USB device that was being used on his laptop that was causing all of his session performance issues, which is really crazy. And you can imagine how frustrating that must have been, because he was sort of short on answers and long on complaints in terms of helping them resolve it. He'll go into one where we talked about where the network team was saying, hey, we've got plenty of bandwidth, but the reality of it is based on the user behavior, meaning the engineers using graphics intensive applications, they didn't have enough bandwidth. So as you know, network administrators can give you the macro view, but they can't give you the micro view and the allocations to Citrix based on how users are using Citrix. And also go into a home office restructuring conversation they had to have, and then another one around uploading large files to the application. So Avi, do you want to go through those with everyone? Thanks everyone for your time.
Certainly, Kip. Thank you. So let me pull up the technology and show you a couple of the ways how we were able to isolate root cause from a user behavior standpoint right from within the technology. And so to first set the stage, when these type of issues were to occur, imagine that you're receiving a complaint from a VP or from the end user stating, hey, Citrix is slow, just giving that generic term, and now it's up to you as the IT admin to pinpoint root cause. So imagine you receive that support ticket and these issues have happened for the past 2 or 3 weeks. This is where you would go within the console to begin your investigation. In this view, we're pulling in all the Citrix sessions in the environment, both your historical and your active sessions. We don't average or roll up any of our data, so you're going to get the same level of granular detail for a session that took place 2 weeks ago as you would for an active session. That was so vitally important in this particular client use case because these issues have been happening over a period of time. If you're pulling up some of the tools that you have right now, they may be showing you specific data points at a point in time, but what you really need for deep analysis and to understand what was the root cause at those particular points in time is the granular and historical details of what was occurring in those historical sessions. And so you have all these sessions populated right here. Then when the user has put in the support ticket, you can dynamically search for just that user by typing in their name. This will dynamically filter based off any text on the screen. And now you're ready to dive into any of those users' individual sessions that took place, for example, over the past 3 weeks. When you find the session that you want to investigate, you just click on it. And what will populate is a screen that has all of the high-level key data points that went into this user Citrix session in a single view. So you're looking at the client endpoint machine, what server that they were accessing, the client IP address, the receiver version that's on the endpoint. Then in a single view here, you're going to have all the components that contributed to this user Citrix path. So the client endpoint machine, how they connected into the environment. Was this an internal connection? Was it an external connection? Delivery controller that brokered the session, AD, the session host, and then the hypervisor host that was supporting this user's session, a high-level logon summary breakdown where you can quickly see, was it group policies or a profile loading issue that was impacting that user's logon time, and then key performance metrics that allow L1 or help desk from this view right here to quickly pinpoint root cause. Now, it's great that this is all rolled up onto one screen and allowing quick analysis, but sometimes, especially in the user behavior scenario where that is impacting performance, you're going to need a little bit more granular detail to have a further investigative effort to understand what was the root cause. And what you'll notice across the top is that there's a series of dedicated tabs. For example, logon duration issues, the ICA and HDX tab, and we're going to be spending a lot of time on today's session in this particular tab because this is going to give insight from everything from bandwidth available for the user, bandwidth being utilized by that user, and again, what the user was doing within their session. Moving into the data center, you then have your session host. So whether in this case, there was a XenApp server and VDI servers in the environment, where you're able to see CPU, memory, storage metrics, all correlated for the time frame of the user session. The hypervisor host metrics, so CPU, memory, storage, the data stores that are attached, as well as any other VMs that are being supported by that same host. Processes running on the session host, as well as alerts and event logs. So our clients tell us that with these tabs, they have all the information that they need to be able to quickly pinpoint root cause within a few clicks, anything from the application layer, the hypervisor, the session host, and again, the main point of today's discussion, end user behavior. So let's now dive through each of these different root causes that are the type of user behavior issues that we found. Starting off, again, there's a number of different areas, so which we're going to be touching on, such as USB devices being improperly used, insufficient network bandwidth allocated to the Citrix users, the home office setup was restructured for performance, but there's issues for remote workers, and then how we were able to pinpoint that it's uploading a large file to the application. But remember, from the ITM perspective, it's not like you're given those type of details in a support ticket. They're just saying Citrix is slow, and then you have to put the pieces together. So when these issues come in, a troubleshooting workflow that is very common is right from the summary page here, where you're going to first take a look at round trip time. I'm sure everyone on the call is very familiar with round trip time, but just in case, round trip time is the amount of time from when a user does an action for that to traverse the network, be processed on the session host, and display back on the client endpoint. And you're going to have round trip time correlated for the duration of this user's Citrix session. And so, for example, I can see that on May 24th at 9:35 a.m., this user had 269 milliseconds of round trip time, which is not bad. For the majority of the session, the user had, a decent experience, but what we can see at the end of the session is that round trip time then got all the way up to 1800 milliseconds. And because we have these data interpretation lines, the orange and then the red one set at 350, 450 milliseconds, to allow anyone to quickly see that round trip time was fine for the first 3/4 of the session, but at the end, it was above those critical thresholds. And at those thresholds, say 450 milliseconds, that's when latency is apparent to the end user. So we can see here as an example, at 9:56, this user had 1800 milliseconds of latency. That's nearly a 2-second delay from when the user did something for it to be processed and displayed back at the endpoint. So it's very easy to see, okay, at the end of this user session, they were experiencing poor performance. So now we want to understand what was the cause, and how we were able to understand proving that user behavior was the root cause from here was looking at a couple of different areas. I'm going to start off with the two network portions of it, where for one, there's insufficient network bandwidth allocated to the Citrix users when these engineers were accessing graphically intensive applications. And where they were able to find that was on the IC and HDX tab. So from here, we were just touching on round trip time on that summary screen. We can see it's also displayed here with round trip time. You have network latency, ICA latency. Then at the top right, you have bandwidth metrics such as connection speed available for that user wherever they're working from for Citrix, and also bandwidth out. How much was that user actually utilizing? In this case, at the point when round trip time started to spike at the end of the session, we were able to identify that there was a huge drop in connection speed that was available for that user. So this user had about 28 megabits per second. So if they were saying, hey, it can't be my ISP, they say the most amount of bandwidth possible, you can understand that that user did have enough bandwidth when they weren't having issues. But when they were having issues at the end of the session, we can see that it dropped all the way down to 3 megabits per second. And that's when talking with the user, they were saying, well, I wasn't doing anything different. I was at my desk the entire time. How is my network being impacted by that? What was happening was at this point in time, that's when the kids started streaming Xbox and Netflix and restricting the bandwidth that was available for this user to do the work. So they had a drop in bandwidth significantly at this particular point in time. Now, not only were they dealing with a bottleneck from a network perspective, but then they were also accessing graphically intensive applications. And how they were able to see that is at this bottom left-hand chart. You have the ICA channel usage. And the way how Citrix is architected is there's virtual channels that handle different functionalities depending on what that user is doing within the session. And you're seeing how we break all these open. So audio bandwidth, clipboard bandwidth. Did this user have a large copy and paste job that hung up the session? Thin wire bandwidth, which is the Citrix display adapter. And that came in very crucial in this particular use case where this user was accessing a graphically intensive application. And I'll get to that in just a moment, but just to kind of add to the level of detail that we're providing, you can see that all of these are inbound and outbound. This is from the server perspective. So audio bandwidth in, was that user on a Teams call and talking into the session? Audio bandwidth out, was that user streaming Pandora or Spotify? And based off of the virtual channel that's being utilized within the session, you can then get insight into end user behavior. So in this particular use case, when the user had their highest point of round trip time, we can see not only is there a direct correlation with the drop in connection speed, we can also see that thin wire bandwidth was being heavily utilized at that time. So this user had a combination of, it's usually not just one particular issue and that's it. Usually it's a combination of a couple, as it was in this case, where they were using graphically intensive application, did not have enough bandwidth to support that type of usage, which thus resulted in the high round trip time. So that was showing two of those use cases where it was user behavior, where there's other users at that user's home that was using the bandwidth and restricting the bandwidth available for the actual worker. and also then using a graphically intensive application with that lack of bandwidth, which combination of both of those resulted in the high round trip time. Now, the other two use cases that we were talking about that we helped identify for this user, we were able to utilize the USB bandwidth, because what was happening was you had with Citrix to assist with best utilizing peripheral devices, you'll oftentimes set up client redirection where any of those processing should really be done on the client side instead of within the Citrix session, which was supposed to be the case for this client. They were trying to, again, have that client redirection feature enabled so that for certain, whether it's specific monitors, 3D applications, that processing was going to take place on the client side instead of within the actual Citrix session. And what the IT team noticed was that there was USB bandwidth being utilized heavily within the session, which should not have been the case if the client redirection feature was taking place. So it was very helpful to understand that they had a policy that was not acting correctly, thus having these USB devices being used by that VP that was impacting the performance. So another great use case on how to be able to use the technology to understand what was incorrectly configured and thus driving up poor performance from that USB perspective. And that'll take place for a number of, any peripheral device that's hooked up to the client side and being utilized from within a Citrix session. Now, the last use case was a user was uploading a large file to an application, and how that would then populate was with this drive bandwidth. So if a user is opening or loading a large file into an application on the session host, this can consume a large amount of bandwidth. And what we were able to again see is a spike in drive bandwidth. Everything else was consistent. There was not a drop in connection speed. Network performance was looking fine. From a resource perspective, everything looked fine on that particular session host that the user was accessing. So we knew it wasn't a network issue, and we knew that it wasn't a resource consumption issue. And that is oftentimes what, some of the things, some of the troubleshooting workflows that everyone on the line would typically first do is take a look, how's the network, how is the machine performing? And if you can't find something there, then it's going to potentially be an arduous task in trying to find what the issue was. But with Goliath, we were able to see within just a couple clicks that it was the user trying to upload a large file to that particular application, utilizing a ton of drive bandwidth at the same time that there was the high round trip time. The IT admin was then able to have a data-driven conversation with the end user to state, this is what we're seeing. Do you remember this occurring? And the user's like, oh, that is exactly what actually happened. I completely forgot when I was putting in the support ticket, and was able to immediately identify the issue. So just as far as a recap, those are just a couple ways that we were able to help this client identify that user behavior was the root cause in the form of USB devices being utilized within the session as opposed to client redirection, insufficient network bandwidth being allocated to the user, utilizing a graphically intensive application with the lack of bandwidth available, as well as uploading a large file to a particular application, which a lot of times those are blind spots, but between the IC and HDX tab, the alerts and logs tabs where you would receive any alerts based off of customized alerts or out of the box alerts where we're automatically, as Kit mentioned, looking for hundreds of events, conditions, failure points, and thresholds, as well as being able to dive into the event logs for any application or system error or warning events that took place during the time frame of that particular user session. And with that, I'm going to then pass it back to Kip and dive back into the PowerPoint slide.
Thanks, Avi. And so just to cap off this particular use case, as I said, we're pretty passionate about working with IT folks and doing this type of a service engagement and then having them select us as a vendor was pretty awesome. And we were with them for a number of months troubleshooting these issues and really digging in deeply with them. So there you see the quotes from the folks that worked with us, but it was a fantastic experience, I think, for both of us, and really did help us build a better technology. If you go to the next slide, we'll move into Q&A, and thank you everyone for putting your questions in the chat box. We have a number of them. And by the way, I'll leave you with this slide while we do the Q&A. everyone has a slide like this that talks about their customers. But I think one thing to point out, we didn't talk a lot about the technology overall, but our technology scales to some of the largest Citrix and VMware Horizon implementations in the world. But we have an ease of use and a price profile that give us the ability to be used by small to medium-sized businesses, even community hospitals and colleges. So it's a fantastic technology from that point of view. So there's a tremendous amount of overhead, and it isn't incredibly expensive either relative to competitive products in the marketplace. So let's get to the first question. The first question, I think, Avi, we're going to have to go back into the product, because the first question was, how did you see that you didn't have enough network bandwidth? So I think we probably have to go back in and reiterate how, when they were using that graphics intensive application, how the network was, the network team was saying, hey, there's plenty of bandwidth, but how did we see that there wasn't enough bandwidth allocated to the user?
Sure. Absolutely. I think diving into the technology it's very easy to identify this. So we come back in this particular scenario. First, the IT admin recognized that round trip time again was high. And from this point, if you want to be able to understand how is the network impacting that, you first take a look at network latency. And what is so important about this network latency metric is that this is network latency from the ICA protocol itself. And just to understand, the ICA protocol is really what Citrix is using as far as the communication protocol from the client endpoint to the data center. So the network latency metric here, this is not an ICMP or ping-based test. This is the actual network latency that is impacting this user's Citrix session. And so what you're able to do is very clearly see that network latency was really correlating with the high round trip time. So I immediately recognized, okay, there's a correlation with network latency to round trip time. I now know that is a network related issue, or at least the data is presenting that to me right off the bat. It could have been something else, but right now I'm seeing it as a network issue. From there.
And so go ahead, Avi. Sorry.
At this point, no problem. From this point, this is where you're now trying to understand, okay, it's a network issue, but where is it coming from? Where's the bottleneck? Is it from the client side, or is it something internal? And where you're going to get those answers are on connection speed. And this is the amount of bandwidth that is available for receiver of the workspace app, wherever that user is working from. So in this case, we can see that when network latency was spiking, there was a drop in connection speed for that user at their location. So I now know that this is an issue from the network perspective on the client side and not something internal, which is so useful nowadays, especially with so many people working remotely, to almost use this as a Citrix defense tool. We're saying, hey, it's not actually something with Citrix, even though Citrix is getting blamed. It is something on the client endpoint as far as the amount of bandwidth that's available. And something that's important is that you'll have the network folks say, oh, well, there's plenty of network, amount of bandwidth available at that site. But what happens is they're looking at the total network availability in most cases, not the amount that is allocated just for Citrix. And that's so important if you're talking about a number of users at a particular site that could all be using up that bandwidth. Maybe there was a network duplex issue, so there could be a number of issues. But to be able to objectively point to if it's on the client side or something internal cuts down on the troubleshooting process significantly.
Yeah, thanks, Avi. And to add to that very quickly, the key point here is that what you're seeing in the product when you look at network latency isn't the typical value you would get from the network team. Network latency here is what is being experienced by the end user. Avi brought up the fact that we're pulling this from ICA protocol, which is true. The value, though, is that this is the only view into what is the user experiencing, right? Because typically you'd look at network, you'd look at other IT elements and try to surmise what they're experiencing, right? This is what's showing the actual end user experience and what the end user is feeling and seeing on their end, regardless of what the network is saying or the server is saying, etc. So thanks, Avi. Second question, do you offer monitoring as a service? The answer is yes to that. Another type of question similar is, do you provide a SaaS version? And the answer is yes, we do. Can you alert me in advance if user behavior is a problem? And that's an amalgam of a couple of different questions, I think. But the answer to that question is a simple yes. Okay. The user behavior will manifest in latency or in some other performance metrics that we can alert. And then when you get the alert, you can kick off your investigation. That's how you prove that it's end user behavior. So we don't have an alert specifically for end user behavior, but if it's end user behavior, as Avi showed in the demo, you'll get an alert on one of those metrics that points to end user behavior being the issue. And we put all of that data into one view. Does your software allow us to prove end user issues are due to home Wi-Fi? Yeah, we have a great example of this actually. First we'll tell you at a glance if there's an issue on the client side. As Avi showed early in the demo is, hey, now you can see very quickly, is it server side or is it client side? Then in a few clicks and with some questions to the client, you can be able to determine if Wi-Fi is the root cause. And this goes for enterprises as well, where we've solved issues like this, where a remote location, a remote office has a few different Wi-Fi devices, for example, and one is down or two are down and everything's being pulled through one Wi-Fi connection. Next question, do you have a service to troubleshoot the same issues we discussed? Yeah, we have a turnkey service that we had mentioned in the demo, and we have services. Anything basically you see in our technology, we can offer as a service, whether it's an assisted service or a fully outsourced and managed service. Avi, here's one is for you. End users are having difficulty logging on. I don't know if it's user behavior, but I want to get advanced notice. Can you do that?
Yes, absolutely. Within the technology, you can certainly be alerted on logon times based off of thresholds. So that, say, if you want to be notified anytime that there's a logon time that was 60 seconds or higher, you can certainly receive a notification on that.
Great. And support for Citrix Cloud. Yes, we do have support for Citrix Cloud and have for quite a while. Avi, how much scripting is involved in what was demonstrated today?
This is all done out of the box, so there's no scripting that's required to get any of the information that was presented today. You do have the ability to utilize scripts within the technology if you want, but it's not required for anything that was shown today.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key point, isn't it? Is that what we did was take sort of a different approach. Scripting is used heavily, obviously, in IT, but in an environment like Citrix, where not everybody knows exactly what to monitor. They don't know what to monitor at what threshold. And who has the ability, the time to either pull out of a library or create 350 scripts for different events, conditions, and failure points. So what we did is sort of create an environment where you have the best of both worlds, right? So we took all of the typical scripting one would use to proactively try to monitor the environment. We automated that, right? We made it all into our intelligence and automation package, implemented that into our software, but we retained the ability for people who write scripts or want to use scripts to execute those scripts within our technology. And so creating your own script or scripting library, so to speak, within our technology. And then that means you can alert on it, report on it, etc. So it's really kind of the best of both worlds. We didn't go over reports very much, and I've got 3 different questions here, Avi, on reporting. Do you want to briefly go through some of the reporting capabilities? And while you're pulling that up in the product, what I can tell you is that there are not multiple products involved, and the amount of time you want to retain your data is really up to you. You have full control of it. Okay, so and you can decide then how long you keep it and how you want to look at it, right? Certain organizations want to analyze technology over 90 days, or they want to analyze it over 120 days, sometimes up to a year, I think is the longest one we have. And to do that, we do that in all the same core products. So you can literally search for a user, and maybe Avi, you can show that in the product quickly, is in the same product, you can search for a user back 90 days if you want, right? Or 30 days, etc. Same product as you look at if you want to run reports, which is different than other products, right? Where you have separate logins. One is sort of an analytics platform, and the other is your real-time monitoring. We bring real-time monitoring and analytics together.
Yeah, so as far as reporting, that's something that our clients heavily utilize because we're collecting all of this deep and broad data. And we touched on some of it during the demonstration, but overall, you can see some of the different areas that we're able to report on. So on the left-hand side, end user performance metrics such as log on duration, latency. In the center, end user activity. So how productive are the workers being? When are the peak usage times? And on the far right, system performance. So how are the VMs performing? How's the server health overall for the environment? How's the host performing? And with all of these different data points, you're able to easily share this information, whether it's via PDF, Excel, CSV. You can integrate into third-party tools such as ticketing systems like a ServiceNow or event management platform like Splunk. Then you have the ability to enhance all this data by leveraging dozens of out-of-the-box reports, configurable dashboards, and performance graphs. And just to show an example of one report that's being heavily utilized nowadays is our end user experience scorecard. And this report is being, let me share it out right now, is one where it's giving management not just the ability to see how the environment is performing as a whole, but being able to then understand where are there areas for improvement. So on the right-hand side, you're able to see core end user experience metrics per user. So you're able to see the specific user, what their score is, which is based off of the metrics on the right-hand side and the legend on the bottom left. And you're able to see based off round trip time, ICA latency, network latency, connection speed, really the crucial data points to understand the user experience. And based off of what their metrics are saying, understand is that excellent, good, fair, and poor, and then have that be scored so that at a quick glance, you're able to see, well, for Blake Simpson, everything looks good. His user experience score is a 90, but then you come down here and you see Cameron Ross's score is at a 70, which is again being driven by the legend. And I can see immediately that his average network latency appears to be a huge bottleneck because it's in the red. I see that Jane Taylor and James Kerr are also in the red. Are these users all working from a particular site and all having performance issues? And then on the left-hand side, you have the overall user experience score for the environment as a whole, and then these different metrics and the scores associated with that level of performance to understand where are there areas for improvement. We have clients that are using it in just that way. We do offer this at a no-cost benchmarking tool. So if you are interested, please let us know at techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com if you're interested in receiving this scorecard, where we'll have this up and running for you in a matter of just a couple hours. And then you're able to see the overall user experience score. And then most importantly, where are there areas for improvement? Kip, was there anything else that you wanted me to touch on from a reporting standpoint?
No. In fact, that is the last question. So I'll turn it back over to you, Avi, as the moderator here. Thanks, everyone, for your time. We certainly appreciate it.
Certainly. Yes, thank you, everyone, so much for your time on today's session. Really do appreciate it. There is a short survey after this webinar, so if you could please fill that out to help us focus our content on your needs. We always love to be able to make sure that these are tailored towards what people out in the industry are looking to actually see and see if we could potentially provide some content that will be valuable for you. And if you do have any additional questions, please email us at techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. And again, really do thank everyone for attending today and for your time. And it was great to have you all on the line today. We appreciate it.